Hi, Lincoln. How are you?
Doing well, thanks, Hem. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. This is One Humanity podcast. I invite people who are working in the field of ecology, who want to contribute to Mother Earth. You are the founder of Forested. Please tell me a little bit more about it. Why did you establish this organization and what motivated you?
Sure, Forested is here to try to produce food and supplies for people while also restoring a healthy forest ecosystem. We're based just outside of Washington, D.C., in Bowie, and um, the ecosystem in the eastern United States is this beautiful, wonderful, productive forest. But for the most part, our food is not supplied from forest-based agriculture. So in my opinion, if you want to really restore ecosystem health, you need to do that in the lands that are producing the food because those lands are huge. At this point, we're using a large percentage of the world's land to grow our food, which is mostly the world's biggest crops by acreage are wheat and corn and soybeans and things like that. So forest gardening or agroecology in the forest is about what crops can we produce from a farm, a type of farm that is based on the forest and grows like the forest and functions like the forest. Because the forest is what the ecosystem here is what gives us ecological functions like clean water and healthy soil and wildlife habitat. So that's the goal with our project here.
Wonderful. I volunteered at Forested 2 years ago, and when I was there, I felt kind of connection with the land. The work you are doing, the great work. In fact, I was really inspired by your work, and I thought that if we could do similar work in other part of the United States or other part of the planet, this planet would be a better place. Could you please share a little bit more about your mission and vision? Um,
Sure. Well, right now we have this amazing economy that delivers us all kinds of stuff. Like I'm looking at these books over here. These used to be that maybe a wealthy person could own a few books. Now we have this economy that produces. I've just moved and giving away many books because uh, they're so abundant, and I have to just choose my favorite ones because I just don't have the space for them. So we have this economy that's producing a lot of stuff, making it accessible to have a comfortable lifestyle for many millions of people. Um, so we've accomplished a lot in that sense. I'm very grateful for the steady supply of food and materials and manufactured goods that we have. But I think we need to be asking a question about where we want to go next, because um, right now we're taking a heavy toll on the Earth's systems, on the resource cycles, on water quality, etc. So, and certainly on wildlife. I think we need to move toward a future where we still have a good lifestyle for people. Perhaps people can reduce how much they're consuming, but we can also learn to produce what we need more in harmony with local ecosystems wherever we live. So we didn't really need to do this, a couple thousand years ago. That the beginning of agriculture was perhaps 8 or 10,000 years ago. And for the first many thousands of years, we didn't really need, it didn't matter so much what human beings were doing in the world. We weren't a very important ecological force. But right now, we are the main ecological force in the world. So what we do matters more. So we need to adapt to that and take on the responsibility of designing our supply systems to be to be fully functioning ecosystems, and that's tricky. I don't have all the answers to that, but that's the pursuit. There are many other people working on this also from different angles. My particular angle is growing diverse forest gardens, studying the forest carefully, and trying to learn and learn the lessons that we can from there, and then say, okay, how can we produce our food in a way that functions like the forest?
Where do you want to see yourself or forested after 5, 10, maybe 15, 25? Maybe I'm kind of futuristic type of person. This question kind
Sure.
of, always I think that, okay, what next?
Yeah. Well, I started Forested in 2012, so we're already 11 years old. And for our garden in Bowie, that's it's just starting to have some of the crops. Some of the crops have been going for many years now, like the berries. Some of the nut trees are only just starting to produce their first crops. We have a good crop of acorns coming in this year, for example, a few pecans, a few butternuts. So I'm excited for the second decade of the garden there, to see increased yields. The yields have been steadily rising. They are not huge yields yet, but I think that the potential for them to continue to grow is great. We get the chance to speak to many people. Many people take tours. Many people are curious. Many people recognize that these are the kind of questions that we need to be asking, and these are the kind of explorations we need to be undertaking. So once in a while, from our experiments with forest gardening, we generate an insight that other people can take and use on their properties. And the hope is that will spread, that we can be part of this growing movement. We're a leader in the DC region in terms of forest gardening as a pursuit. I've gotten to be involved with designing and now installing and maintaining many food forests, including public park food forests. So that seems to be, especially the urban park food forest, seems to be something where there's a quickly growing interest and demand for that. So when I began being a forest gardener, I wasn't too concerned with, as long as I'm creating forest gardens, I don't mind so much how that's happening. And it seems to be that the demand is for me to make private and public forest garden landscape designs. So, and then help implement those. So that seems to be the direction where the economy can connect with forest gardening right now. So we also put on chef dinners, which has generated useful information about how to use some of the crops of the forest that are not as well known, that people are not accustomed to eating. So that's a pretty exciting and fun thing to do. The chef will give the chef the ingredients, and then they help produce, like, what's the culture around this food. So in 10, 20 years, I could see us having a lot more forest gardens around the region. I've just been blown away by how much the knowledge of this movement has grown, even in the 10 years that I've been involved, and I've gotten to be a part of that by going around and giving many talks on the topic and designing many gardens. It looks like that is going to continue. And in terms of how I participate, I just need to remain open-minded and aware of the fact that I could be wrong about any of the things that I'm trying, any of the assumptions that I'm making, because if I want to remain relevant, it's not easy, right? Our agriculture is the way it is for a reason. It's mechanized, it's massive scale. We've designed all these miracle machines and chemicals that make maintenance of the landscape, of the agricultural landscape, much less labor intensive. It comes with many problems as you're aware. But I don't think we should forget what a miracle it is in some ways. So, what's the future where all of our farms are now agroecosystems? And how do we get there? Um, I wouldn't say that I know the answer to that, but I know that I can continue to ask that question, to grow the crops, to give people experiences of crops that they haven't had before, and playing with polyculture, where you're growing multiple species in one landscape. That's not the order of the day in our agricultural system. Our agricultural system is based on monoculture, vast blocks of one single species, and all the chemicals that are needed to maintain that, because nature abhors a vacuum. As soon as you have just one species, the only other species living in that landscape are the predators of that species, or the things that want to feed on your crop. The diversity of the forest protects against an imbalance of pests. But diversity is also much harder to maintain in an agricultural landscape, especially if you're going to try to make it huge scale. So I am not there are people working on this from the angle of how do we do a higher degree of polyculture mechanized. My gardens are based around hand harvest and community involvement. So I think it's an important part of the picture, but others will have to study the industrial side of that. How will we feed everyone and restore all the lands where people live, and produce our food?
Wow, wonderful vision, Lincoln. And not only that, you are walking the talk. When if somebody visits Forested, they will see you are really not preaching but practicing it also. So that inspired me a lot. In fact, I think my little land, whatever land I have, Lincoln, here, I try to make it. I try to grow vegetables, fruit as naturally as possible. My daughter calls it jungle house, and my younger daughter calls it bird's nest. My sons calls it, it's like a big mess over here. So they have the different way to explain. I have 3 children, so
interesting that one of your kids, they call it a jungle or a bird's nest or a mess. I think these are comments that have a lot of insight in them, and they kind of encapsulate the challenge of moving toward agroecology, because there's a reason that we have this sense of untidiness about the forest, because it is not an unmanaged wild forest. It does produce some food, but to our culture, it looks untidy, maybe even threatening. And one of my main design challenges with forest gardens is to make them inviting places that are understandable for people. People don't especially like a tangled jungle. And my place in Bowie, it strikes some people as beautiful and some people as a jungle. So maybe I've got the balance about right. But I think we do need to shift our understanding and our aesthetic sensibilities, because aesthetics, like our sense of beauty, it tells us something more. Also, it tells us whether, in a gut feeling, like whether this is a good landscape, whether this is a productive landscape or not. And so it's curious. You can see a wheat field. You can be driving through the landscape in your car, manufactured from materials around the world, and you go past a wheat field, and it strikes you as beautiful, because for 10,000 years we've been producing food that way, and it tells you that there's food being produced, and you can see the lions if they're approaching, etc. That there's something beautiful in that. But if you look more closely, sometimes if you're walking by a wheat field in eastern United States around here, you'll see that the whole field is blonde colored, except for around the edges. The very edges might be green. And that is because the farmer has recently sprayed a chemical on there that kills all plants, except for a very few genetically modified plants. The chemical is Roundup, and that will be applied to wheat fields to kill the crop so that it can dry, so that the seeds can dry while the plant is still standing, and makes harvest easier. But when they run the spray truck through there, it doesn't quite get the very margins of the field. So you can look for it next time you're walking past a wheat field. If you find like a few green plants of wheat all around the edges and it's all blonde in the middle, that means Roundup has been applied to kill off the crop so that it can desiccate and then be more harvestable. So that gets me then questioning my initial reaction of beauty to that field. And I think there is still beauty in it, and it is still food. Like Roundup may have harmful effects on people, but we're using it for a reason. It does make that industrial food production a lot easier. But I have some serious concerns about using that chemical that kills all plant life at the continental scale every year, because I think that there may be some consequences coming down the road for that. Like it feels dangerous to me. So on the forest garden side, on the agroecology side, I think we need to learn to design landscapes that when people walk into them, they understand what's going on, so that they can interact and manage. Because we're trying to design human habitats, human forest habitats, because here we are, we're living in this forested ecosystem. We're adapting it to ourselves, but we're also trying to adapt ourselves to the forest where we find ourselves. And so it's a conversation back and forth. We need to learn to understand this ecosystem, but we can also manage it so that it is useful and productive for us, as well as thriving in an ecological sense.
Of course, there might be some challenges. Can you please share some of the challenges you are facing while running forested, and how do you overcome these challenges?
Yeah, well, on the plant growing front, I would say this time of year, midsummer, is one of the tougher times in the United States. Eastern United States, we get very hot and humid this time of year, and the weeds are growing very fast. And with a forest garden, once your trees are large, they are not bothered by weeds. We don't water any of our trees, because they are locally well adapted for the most part. But anything that's smaller than a tree, like a shrub, if you picture a blueberry bush, this time of year, even if you have it in a well-mulched bed, if you have any kind of wildness around anywhere, which I think we do need in our agroecosystems, we need some wild vegetation for the ecological benefits that it provides. That vegetation, though, it's expansive, and it will get in the form of weeds to things like shrub beds, vegetable gardens, etc. And you're probably experiencing this in your own home right now. So there's, like any system, there is a certain amount of weeding and maintenance. It's nothing. It's nothing too unmanageable. We can do it. We use a variety of tools. A scythe is a tool that we like, which is a hand mowing thing. We use some mowers, some mechanical mowers. When it's time to harvest, my forest garden is very diverse, and some of the volunteers who have been there a long time, they know how to walk around the garden and identify the correct trees and go find them. But if your diversity is too high, it can be very difficult for any new participant, any new person with no background, who walks into a typical you-pick apple orchard where it's nothing but apples for many rows and rows and rows of apples. Any person with no previous background can go harvest those apples without a problem. Whereas in my garden, because we have more diversity, you might go harvest from a pear tree, but then you have to kind of explore around the garden to find the next one. And so I'm trying with the garden. First of all, I'm open to the possibility that I have laid out sections of it too diverse, which I think I have. But as we continue with additional plantings, we'll do things like I try to think to myself, okay, what's the minimum amount of this crop that is going to be worthwhile for people to walk over there and go get it. So in the case of blueberry bushes, I think you need about 10, at least 10, maybe 15 or 20 together. So they're surrounded by that row of blueberry bushes is surrounded by some additional diversity, plants to fix nitrogen in the ground, plants to support pollinator, insects, etc. But if it's going to be a worthwhile harvest location, you need to have enough of it all together to make that harvest worthwhile. So that's a challenge on the design front, and that's what I tell my students and my clients. We try to find the right balance of diversity and manageability without going all the way back to monoculture. I guess the challenge relates to the economy and how to get paid for doing forest gardening. Like I mentioned before, my income is mostly from landscape design. I design only food forests. I don't do any other type of landscape, and there is a demand for that. I get some income from our chef dinners in an agroecology sense, or agrotourism rather. But we don't sell produce directly to grocery stores, for example. We do sell a little bit to restaurants occasionally, but most of our produce goes to the volunteers who take care of the garden. So it's not a farm that generates a lot of direct income from it. We're living very close to the city where the cost of living is high. There really are very few farmers who are making a living strictly from growing produce and selling, even on traditional farms around here. Like, those people tend to move further out in the country where cost of living is lower and land is cheaper. So it's not the easiest thing to do. But that's okay with me that people are willing to pay for classes and for consultations and design work and so if that's how people want to interact, if that's how the economy wants to interact with forest gardening, and enables me to make a living at it, that's okay with me. We'll continue to grow the gardens and try to push the understanding, at least, of how you manage this landscape. But it's tricky.
I think you are right.
Yeah, and some people do. There are some models for small scale farms to make a living, but even within the industrial farming, there are many unprofitable, huge industrial farms. I've spoken with farmers like that. Most of their profits are coming from direct government subsidies at every level of the system, from transportation to processing to the seeds and the research in the universities to the actual crop insurance and everything. Like, the government subsidizes our industrial farm system, possibly for good reasons, but and even then, many farmers, like say corn farmers or beef farmers, they have off-farm jobs like that supplement their family income. So to me, it's not a terrible shame to say I'm not making my full living and supporting my family from the produce sales from this forest garden. That would be cool if I could figure that out, but the economic climate where we are makes that very difficult. So you got to do other things. You got to go make connections to the economy where the economy places a greater value than produce. We pay unprecedentedly low prices for our food in America today compared with historical periods. We pay a small percentage of our income. We expect to pay barely anything for our food because of the global industrial food system that brings us all this cheap food.
What do you think, Lincoln? What can we do about it?
Well, what's encouraging to me is that, well, you can take it to like the macroeconomic scale, almost to the philosophical scale, and say, taking America, America produces plenty of wealth. We have enough stuff. We have enough food, clothing, and shelter, basic necessities for all of our people. It's not evenly distributed by any means. And I wouldn't advocate like full on even distribution. We got to keep working to support the poor, those people who are hard to help, et cetera. There's always going to be those challenges. But at the macroeconomic scale, we have enough. So the question becomes, what do we want to do with this abundance? What do we want to do with our extra time? Like most Americans feel busy and like they don't have a lot of extra time, which as a sidebar, it's interesting that the person who went and lived with the Amish people who live with much lower technology, one of their main takeaways was that they have so much time. Even though they make all their own clothes and wash them by hand and they grow all their own food without the aid of tractors and dishwashers and stuff, they have a lot of time. But at the macroeconomic scale, we should have plenty of time. So how do we want to spend our time? How do we want to spend our extra resources? And I think that there's a lot of appeal in reconnecting with the land for a lot of people. Some people will call themselves like, I'm not an outdoorsy person, I'm an indoorsy person. And there's some truth in that, but in the end, every person relies on the outdoors, even if they have somebody else go outdoors for them and grow the food. There's a lot of beauty that a lot of people can get in touch with by being outdoors and being more closely connected with a landscape that supports your life. And you see this, like a lot of different communities are very interested in reforming the way we manage the landscape around the places where we live, so that it is a healthy forest that's helping supply our food. So I think that we have much to learn and much joy of discovery ahead of us. Like how do we create these landscapes that are just beautiful and really work well for the different groups of people? Like right now we have this pretty nice forest garden right at a big elementary school in DC. It's starting to produce food, but we got to ask ourselves, like, how is this going to best serve the local community? And that includes the teachers who are very busy teaching, the people walking through the local rec center next door, the students. So that's one of the questions we're asking this fall is how can we support the teachers in engaging with this food forest, bringing the kids there, letting the kids be in touch with the landscape. So we have a lot of work to do in this regard, but I think it seems to be a direction that much of America wants to go. I think it's a joyful and hopeful vision to try to. It's not just that you need to reduce your footprint; it's that you can reintegrate with your local ecosystem. I think it's a vision for environmentalism. It's the next type of environmentalism where we see people as a healthy, perhaps a keystone species in the ecosystem, which I think some indigenous groups or traditional lifestyle groups figured that out, some better than others. But I think it's something that we've done before, and we can pursue that.
You know, what a coincidence. I was visiting Amish community this Saturday.
Really?
And this is my first time, Lincoln. I was so happy to see two different worlds. on the one hand, United States, like in a developed country, all these things. Another side of that life, the lifestyle and this community has. And I was so happy to see that the way they are, making their own stuff, and uh, I enjoyed it. Can you please share how were you when you were growing up and your interest, hobbies, and how they evolve or
Hmm.
develop?
Well, I was raised playing outside a lot and with a lot of forest and fields behind me, a subdivision where I lived, but suburban neighborhood, but with plenty of forest to go play in. So I think that was formative, and I would like for as many kids as possible to have that available to them. Um, in the suburbs, it's we kind of take it for granted and we don't manage it very well in the United States. We just from the time that I was growing up, I've seen so many of these forests cut down and made into new developments without very much concern for saving and setting aside the lands that that make the region beautiful and productive and ecologically sound. So that made me angry for a while, seeing how the place where I grew up was changing into many like okay, so I lived in Bowie where I am now until I was 12, moved away until I was 23 or something, 10 years away. During that time they had built new shopping centers like you know a new big grocery store area, abandoned that and built even bigger ones. So during the time that I was away, like I moved back in this new shopping center right next to me. They went out of business very shortly, and there was an even bigger one built. So um, there's some foolishness in the way that we use the land, and that made me into a sort of an angry environmentalist for a while. But then I find that agroecology and the pursuit of that, and asking the question, how can people live better on the land and reconnect with the ecosystem, is a very hopeful direction for me to pursue. So that's what I'm choosing to do. And children in the city, they don't have necessarily any forest that they can easily run to and experience a little bit of wildness, some berries. So that's why I'm excited to be part of creating now many forest gardens in the city, in pocket parks or larger urban spaces, so that the kids growing up in those neighborhoods can have that experience. That nature connection, I think, is very important. It's a fundamental human thing to be outdoors and to harvest a little food from the ground, from the landscape. So, and in the city, it doesn't happen unless you deliberately make it happen to a certain extent. So I'm excited about the growing urban food forest movement and to be a leader in that in the DC region, because I think I hope that it will have a positive impact on some of the kids that grow up and get to experience this.
Can you please share some of the most influential people in your life and how they inspired you?
Sure. Well, I think my thinking was formed a lot by my parents, who they love people and they also love the environment. And when I saw those things in conflict, it was a conflict inside myself for a long time. I didn't know, because some environmentalism, like, okay, so I had a geography teacher in high school who I loved, and he was a very charismatic person, very knowledgeable, great teacher. But he had a very dark form of environmentalism where he went so far as to express ideas such as like the human race is a disease on the planet, you know. And you got to be careful of philosophy like that, because I think it's not a good way of looking at the situation. I can see why people would slip into that, but I think you got to love people, and 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 a way to love them is to try to share with them the joy of taking care of our planet a little bit better, and to learn from them. And then specifically in forest gardening, Martin Crawford is a person in England who has been working on forest gardens now for probably approaching 40 years, maybe 35 years. And I got to, out of school, I went to an ecological design school, the Conway School of Landscape Design, and worked in regular landscape design office for 5 years, designing high-end fancy landscapes, but trying to make it a little bit more ecological. My boss hired me to be the ecological conscience of the office. This is very early, we're talking about 2006 or 7. Even then, like that recently, ecology was sort of becoming part of what people would talk about in landscape design. But even just a decade or so later, it's a much bigger part of the conversation now. But my boss, even as an older person who had run his company for a long time, was interested in this new ecological movement. So he hired me to be the ecological guy in the office. So I could do that for a while. But then I started learning more about agroecology and forest gardening. And it was visiting Martin Crawford over in England and seeing his then 25-year-old forest garden, hearing him speak about it. I came back from that trip and I was ready then to quit my job and jump off the deep end and become a forest gardener full time. So I quit my job on my 30th birthday, and I started Forested. That was in actually, I went back to University of Maryland. I wrote a manifesto about forest gardening, took as many classes as I could in one term at University of Maryland. I submitted my paper about forest gardening to all my professors and said, please read this as critically as you can and tell me what's wrong with this theory, because I'm about to spend the rest of my life pursuing it. So I want as much good input as possible.
So what do you think about the decision to resign your job, regular job? Like I'm in that situation now, and starting Forested. If you reflect on that decision, what do you think?
It was a very exciting time for me. My wife at the time, my ex-wife, had a good job at the Pentagon and was making good amount of money, and I also had a privileged family situation that allowed me to make. I made no money from the forest garden business for the first 5 years. I mean, I had some income, but my expenses were higher than my income for the first 5 years with Forested, and so that it was just my privileged family situation that allowed me to do that, because I also had the 3 small children. So and then gradually things picked up, and now I do make money from the garden, but or from the business, mostly from the consulting, as I said. But it was a very exciting time. It felt risky and dangerous, but I felt very alive. I was reading a lot, and I called every place in the DC region that I could think of that might be open to hearing a talk about forest gardening. So I started giving talks, and I gave I don't know, over several years I probably gave 100 or more different talks at different venues about forest gardening, and that was a great time. Meanwhile, I rented the land where Forested is. I tried to buy land. I looked for land to buy, but I was looking at a fairly a long ramp up to any type of profitability with the business anyway. So I didn't want to take on a mortgage for a piece of land, especially around Bowie. I wanted to be kind of near the city, but all the land is expensive. So I ended up renting land, and I rented this cornfield and started planting trees. So it was a very small, very slow start with just me and no clients and no volunteers and nothing for a long time. But so that was hard sometimes. Like about year 2 or 3, I was saying to myself, "What am I doing? Like I have I'm not producing any crop. All my trees are still small. There's barely anybody coming by. I'm offering classes, canceling most of them because I don't have any network. I have like a client or two a year, because there's not very much demand for forest garden design yet. But I didn't want to sell out and just go start mowing lawns or designing. I wanted to just design forest garden or food forest landscapes. So there was there was a time when I was wondering about quitting for a year or two. Just it seemed like it's like, how am I going to decide when to quit this? Because it's just not. It doesn't seem to be doing. But then it started to pick up, and I tell you what, like the movement, it's still not a wildly profitable business, but I do have now one full-time person working for me and a few part-time, and some good clients. Urban Forestry in DC has been a great client. They have been having me do parks, and also the city of Hyattsville, and very many wonderful private clients. People who are into forest gardens, they tend to be really wonderful people. So it's a nice, there's not that there's it's a growing number of people, but it means you get really cool people for clients, because they've got their somewhat mission driven. So that's been just a joy working with those people.
So, but it looks like that decision was a wonderful decision. When I talk to people of our kind of like-minded people, almost everybody knows you, Lincoln. And I say when I volunteered, when I said that, I volunteer at Forested, and yeah, I know Lincoln, I know Forested. Many people said that. So it seems that you are pioneer in this field, one of the pioneer at least. Yeah. So, and I'm really thankful. Um, I'm really glad you took such a risk, and I mean, at least some level of risk, and you did. So, any books you would like to recommend, Lincoln?
There are a lot of good books.
Maybe a couple of them, at least. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Dave Jackie with co-author Eric Tonsmeyer wrote a 2-volume huge book about edible forest gardening, which was a big deal for me. It's now a good 15, 20 years old, but it's a wonderful book. It was a big part of me deciding, and hearing Dave Jackie speak about this book was also a big part of me deciding to pursue forest gardening. I don't know. It would be interesting to hear from Dave Jackie what, if anything, he would approach differently compared to the book, because I don't think all the recommendations in there are good ones, but it's a huge work, like carving out new intellectual territory. And so it was a huge part of for learning about edible plants that grow in the eastern United States. I love all of the books by Sam Thayer. I think he's the best foraging author, and forest gardening and foraging they overlap a lot. It's like I take the plants that Sam Thayer forages, and then I try to grow them in a cultivated or semi-cultivated way. So he wrote, for example, one called Nature's Garden that includes in that foraging book, unlike Unlike many foraging books where it'll list like 300 plants and just a tiny blurb about them, he picks only like 30 or 50 plants for the book, but he treats each one in great detail, how you cook with it. And it's plants that are really useful, not ones that are like you can eat it if you're starving. But like, so he has 50 pages in the book Nature's Garden just about how to harvest and process and cook acorn food, which was the beginning of my learning about acorns, which have become a really important food for me because I think that the eastern United States forest produces so much acorn. It's a wonderful food if you know how to process it properly, and it's almost entirely ignored right now, which is insane. We clear the forest and we grow wheat when we should be learning to steward the forest and harvest acorns and eat that instead. It makes very good food. So I do love Sam Thayer's books. Yeah, those are two good ones.
Yeah. One thing maybe people do not, they don't know about you. If you want to share anything, any, if not, totally fine.
Well, right now I have quite a menagerie of animals. So at my house here right now, I'm raising baby ducks and geese, together with my older ducks and geese. So we kept them at the forest garden for 10 years, and then we had a fox learn how to tolerate the electric fence. And so it was just killing all of them. So we had to bring them back home, and now we're raising young. So I have them. I have my kid's pet rabbit. We have 2 cats and a dog, and partly this is partly because I'm recently remarried, and my wife, like I have 3 kids, she has 3 kids, so now we have between us 6 kids and a million animals. And I love it. It's a great life. But it's a lot of animals to feed, and a lot of kids.
Yeah, you made me, you kind of remind me my childhood. I used to have all kind of animals, dogs, cats, dogs, geese, you name it. Chicken. In fact, some people call me chicken boy because I used to make money selling chicken when I was a 6, 7 year old.
Cool.
Yeah, and then uh, I can imagine how if you love something, Lincoln, you find a way to do it. Yeah. So, uh, uh, if you could be remembered for one thing, what would that be?
I think forest gardening and loving people, I hope.
Definitely. This podcast, the target audience are especially younger generation,
Okay.
because I think they are, as I said, I'm kind of futuristic type of person. And maybe we after we are gone from this planet, maybe some people might be benefiting because this is kind of evergreen. Your ideas, your insight are kind of evergreen, at least for me. It's a 2 part. First part is if you could go back and give your 16-year-old self one piece of advice, what would it be?
Hmm. It's so hard to know. I guess 16-year-old Lincoln had to have his journey and make his own discoveries. Hmm. Because I wouldn't want to take that away, by saying like, here's what's going to happen or something. But I guess I would give him some encouragement that you have talent, you have a good mind. Go ahead and don't be afraid. Go ahead and pursue what you're called to do. and it'll be okay. And connect with people who are similarly minded, or who like talented, strong people, good people. Seek those people out, and try to spend time with them. Yeah, I don't know.
Nice. The second part, obviously, what piece of advice you would give to someone who is starting out his career, maybe related to your domain, maybe different. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, this is about people as much as it is about plants. So, and indeed, the people side is probably the more challenging, and occupies most of my time. Like, it's great to learn about the plants. I am a plant geek. I know a lot of things. I don't, there's others that know much more. But so either you have to be really interested in people, or work with somebody who wants to do that side. And forest gardening, it really does touch on every aspect of life. Like, we're trying to reintegrate our whole lifestyle with the forest ecosystem. So it almost doesn't matter too much what you're into. It can connect with forest gardening, and should. So so you can look at what your talents are and what your interests are, and connect into the movement. I think of all the health oriented people. There are people who have led forest bathing and yoga and medicinal, like harvested plants for medicines at the forest garden. People who do art there, people who want to make musical instruments, or artwork from the things that they find in the garden and in nature. Obviously, food is a huge one. Crafts of all different kinds. So there's no end of different talents and skills that are needed in the forest garden movement, in my opinion. So we need all types of people, even engineers, who sometimes so if I was talking to 16-year-old Lincoln, maybe I would say, study engineering, which is a weird thing to say, but this is an art, but it's also a science, and engineering is, at least as a mental discipline, like a really useful and rigorous way of thinking. So we need those type of people who can look at a result really clearly, and try to accept that and do better. I mean, engineers have some blind spots because they need to define a problem as narrowly as possible. And if you do that, you can tend toward monoculture. I think a lot of engineers have helped create the modern industrial agricultural system. So we need to think, we need to redefine what the challenge is, but then we do need that engineering discipline to discover how we're going to do agroecology as the main way we support ourselves. So anyway, we need all y'all to be involved in pursuing agroecology and remaking our the way that we interact with the land. And I would also say, be patient. People don't like to be yelled at. They might change their mind based on being yelled at and being told they're wrong. But I think my personal bias is that people are going to respond more if you seek the common ground that you have in common, and try to find that joy and that hope while acknowledging the problems. Something needs to change. But if you want, like, as people say, be the change that you want to see. I would say, like, some young people fall into the pattern of just criticizing, because they've realized the world has a lot of problems. But if you're going to do that, you need to also think of something positive you can do with your own life. People will respond to that. If you lead by how you're living your life, if you're proposing a better way and living that out, people will respond to that. I think you'll get more traction from that in the long term than you will merely by criticizing. And be grateful for what you do have. Even the industrial agricultural system, I think we need to be grateful for that because it is feeding us.
Yeah.
As much as we need to move beyond it, or my hope is that we can gradually reform it. But so many people put so much good thought into that system, and we're lucky to have it. So.
Yep. Wow. Great insight, Lincoln. So where can people find you online and how can they support you if they want?
Well, the website is forested, forested.us, forested.us. And there is a link there to our Patreon, which is like give us $1 or $5 a month if you want to support that way. That's very helpful. We're trying to grow that. And if you're in the Bowie area, I'd love to have you come visit the garden. You can volunteer, or you can just hang out. You can try foods that you might not have encountered before, rub shoulders with the crazy cool crew of forest gardeners that work at Forested. And it's a lot of fun. We'd love to have you. We have dinners, chef dinners that are very popular. So, you get to have a fancy meal prepared from forest foods with live music, and those are a lot of fun. There's 2 of them coming up this fall.
Yes. So in Washington Metro region, it's not very far if people are living around this area or anywhere in the world. They can support for this wonderful mission Lincoln has. It's I think it's like not only Lincoln's mission and vision, is kind of it should be sort of humanity's visions thing. I feel that way. I feel connected with your mission and vision, Lincoln. Yeah. Any final word that I didn't ask you?
No, I thought you did a great job covering the territory, I think. And it's really fun talking to you. Yeah, I'm glad you have your garden going. I'd love to know from you what crops are doing the best, what's bringing you the most joy there. Maybe that would be what I would leave everybody with. Anybody who's listening, if you'd like to try forest gardening, it's not complicated. Just start by growing 1 or 2 things that you're excited to try, and you'll find it's surprisingly addictive if you succeed with a little bit with something, and focus on the success a little bit more than you focus on the failure, because you'll grow some plants. Some of them will die. Some of them won't produce. Maybe you won't like the fruit of some of them, but if you're growing a few different things, like some of them will succeed. So focus on that and grow from there.
Thank you so much, Lincoln. Thank you for your contribution to Mother Earth. Thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing your insight. I think people will learn, especially younger generation,